The towers of Dragonstone emerged from the mist like blackened fangs, their wet stone glistening in the pale dawn that seeped across the narrow sea. Salt wind rattled the embrasures and teased the gutters where rainwater glimmered like quicksilver. Beneath Daenerys Targaryen's bare feet, the chamber's rushes whispered with each measured step. She moved as silently as a priestess in the dark, careful not to wake the child swaddled at the room's heart. A single brazier threw out ruby light, softening the fierce angles of the ancient volcanic rock and setting warm embers racing over her silver-gold hair. The simple wool shift she wore clung to her with the heaviness of sea air, yet beneath it her blood ran hot, as though every heartbeat stoked the forge where dragons were once made. She traced a finger along the curve of a scale-shaped tile in the floor, feeling its ridges, letting memory curl like smoke around her. She remembered ash drifting over King's Landing, the crack of stone as Drogon's talons tore keep walls apart, the charnel scent of bodies smoldering in ruined streets. She remembered her own scream ringing back from shattered vaults when a knife found her chest and hope bled onto marble. Yet she had also awakened, on a black shore beneath a sky bright with stars, to Drogon's mournful roar and Jon Snow's desperate tears washing soot from her face. It felt a lifetime ago, though only 2 years had passed. Now the hush of a single infant's breathing filled a chamber once meant for war councils and future battles perched waiting like ravens on a lintel. Aemon Targaryen lay inside a cedar cradle carved by the Stark men who had sailed south with Jon Snow. Lacy breath steamed from his tiny lips. Each exhalation was a dragon's whisper, soft and invisible. His dark curls, so truly black they caught hints of blue when moonlight found them, were damp with the unthinking sweat of babies. But his eyebrows, faint though they were, gleamed the pale silver of House Targaryen, and beneath closed lids strange purple eyes flickered in dreaming. He clenched and unclenched a fist too small to grasp even Daenerys' smallest finger, yet powerful enough to curl around her very soul. She lowered herself beside the cradle, kneeling until old flagstones pressed chill against her shins, and brushed a knuckle across the boy's cheek. Skin like feather down. She had no maester's art to measure the fault lines within Westeros, those silences between great houses where resentment pooled. But she had held them once, as a conqueror, and felt the thrum. This child would inherit something more treacherous than wildfire. He would inherit the fraying weave of 7 kingdoms still unstitched by 2 wars, and she must teach him to mend it, rather than burn it. Her breath caught. Could she? Her dragons had taught her domination. Her own hardship had taught her vengeance. Love, though. Love was foreign as summer isle spice. Sweet and bright and heady, and it frightened her more than any enemy. She laid her palm over Aemon's chest. A small, fierce heartbeat answered, steady as waves against basalt cliffs. Promise. Peril. Shadows moved at the threshold. Jon Snow, still Snow in his own mind, though the world now named him Aegon, had come in without herald, a habit from years on the wall. The lamplight gilded the basted fur collar of the black cloak he had thrown across simple jerkins the color of storm clouds. Damp strands of his night-dark hair stuck to his brow, and his eyes, gray as hoarfrost, lingered on mother and child with an ache too large for language. Daenerys straightened, but did not rise. Their silent communion endured heartbeats. His soft exhale, her half-smile, the creak of flame and iron. He stepped nearer, boots muted by rushes, and knelt opposite her, mirroring the posture that once marked him as supplicant before her. But there was no queen here, and no king, only 2 parents orbiting an infant son. He lifted one weather-rough finger toward Aemon's reaching hand, letting the tiny fingers clamp trespasser. His breath shuddered. Even after months of such moments, surprise still claimed him each time the child recognized, however wordlessly, the blood they shared. Outside the arrow-slit windows the morning lapis deepened, gilded by a creeping opal blush. The fortress stirred, dim clang of kitchen pots, muffled drill calls as unsullied set pikes in perfect cadence, the far cry of a gull wheeling above Blackwater Bay. But here in the Queen's Tower everything lay suspended, as if the world dared not intrude upon first light. John's voice was barely more than wind across snow. He will try to crawl soon. Davos said his youngest took off like a hare at 6 moons. He smiled, one quick corner lifting into mischief so unexpected it stole Daenerys's breath. Gods help us if he reaches Drogon before we do. She matched the smile with a softness few had ever earned from her. Drogon would fold his wings around him and refuse to give him back, like some brooding hen. Memory flickered. Those weeks in exile when Drogon refused even the herds of the Dothraki Sea, rending flesh only when hunger demanded, keeping instead to lonely dunes with her broken body nestled at his feet. A dragon's grief had circled them both, heat without flame, until Jon's stubborn will coaxed her back from death. She swallowed, chastened by the ghost of ashes. Drogon guards him already. I feel it when they share the wind. She saw Jon's throat bob at the unspoken question. Were the tales of dragon riders true? Could a babe be bound to scale and fire while still at the breast? Too soon for answers. Too soon for prophecy. He settled cross-legged now, leaning an elbow to polished cedar. The lords will arrive by week's end. Words heavier than armor. They will want to see him. The pause held an ocean's breadth, then quieter. They will want to measure him. And us. She nodded, fingers curling on nursery edge. And to see if I have shed my scales. Irony laced the words. She would forever be the dragon queen who scorched a city. Forgiveness, she knew, was a rarer substance than dragon glass. Let them measure. Children of dragons grow regardless of rulers' doubts. Still, Jon pressed. We must show them gentler fires. He dragged a hand through hair, letting salty moisture spatter onto his cloak. Sansa wrote again. Winterfell's harvest fails. The golden fields we burned near Ashford, 2 summers past, have not yielded. She curses the crown for every hungry belly. She fears this gathering will be a reckoning. No. Sansa has ever feared me. She feared Cersei first, and rightly, then Ramsay, then me. Fear guides her, as Drogon guides me. Daenerys' shoulders tensed. The mention of the North prickled old wounds. Sansa's silent accusations over the charred ruin of the capital. The suspicious glances of northern lords at her coronation beneath a dawn-lit sky. Tyrion weeping with relief. Jon wearing the steel-gray circlet, wrought of Valyrian links and weirwood inlays. But I do not wish for the North to starve. No, Jon agreed. His eyes steadied on her. Nor do I. A gentle grunt issued from the cradle. Tiny fists pawed the air. Daenerys reached to gather Aemon, lifting him with practiced surety. His lavender eyes, startling against the night hue of his lashes, peered between them, searching faces for stories older than speech. He recognized warmth. He recognized voice. He also recognized the tension that coiled from them like twin dragons guarding different skies. He squawked, half demand, half protest. And Daenerys nuzzled her nose against his crown, inhaling that fragile fragrance of milk and innocence. Jon's palm settled over her arm, rough calluses brushing silk-soft skin. Let me take him to the rookery. The maester will want his morning tincture. She relinquished the weight, fingertips trailing, and watched as Jon stood, babe ensconced in the crook of one arm, his cloak folding to form a dark nest around silver swaddling. He lingered, as though something else wanted voicing, but the boy fussed again, and fatherhood overrode counsel. With a last glance heavy with unshed dawn, Jon strode out into the corridor where torches hissed against stone. Daenerys waited until footfalls faded. Then she exhaled a breath she did not know she had been holding, and sank back on her heels. Her gaze found the carved dragons twisting round the chamber's central pillar. Long ago, Valyrians had shaped these reliefs at the height of their empire, wings unfurled like continents, tails winding through flames. She touched one weathered snout, tracing gouges left by passing centuries. How many conquerors had stood here, measuring ambition against stone memorials? Too many. She closed her eyes and listened for the sea, for the thin morning gulls, for any sign that the world might forgive. Aemon's cry echoed down distant stairs, and her heart leapt after it. Tethered. She began to rise. Stop, she told herself. This hour is for swords in scabbards. She drew a breath. smoothing her skirt. The lords would come. They would weigh crown, and queen, and king, and child. But they would also find dragonfire banked, not extinguished. She would show them an ember can glow without consuming. She straightened her spine, chin lifting a fraction, and followed Jon into the waking keep. Now, across the lower yard, swords rang in clipped patterns of discipline. Unsullied in midnight armor drilled under Grey Worm's silent eye, their shadows elongating over flagstones, still slick with dew. Proximity to a babe's cries had not dulled their edge. Rather, fatherhood in the air seemed to sharpen vigilance. As Jon passed with Aemon pressed against his shoulder, spear halves dipped in mute salute. A boy's squeal, high, delighted, floated from training grounds beyond the battlements. Young Edric Storm, Robert Baratheon's last acknowledged bastard, now page to Lord Gendry, chased a pup between hedgerows with two Tyrell cousins trailing laughter. Dragonstone, once fortress of gloom, had begun to teem with signs of spring long denied the war-scarred island. Jon felt the change in every courtier's stride, every gardener's song, every sweating smith at forges newly fired. When a child is born, the soil remembers seeds. He found Maester Orwyle perched on a stool by the rookery's circular window, scroll in one hand, blueberry on the tongue. The old man's chain rattled a tinny welcome. Ravens clacked from tiered perches, glossy wings stirring. Orwyle set aside parchment, wiping inked fingers on robe. "Your Grace, a fine dawn to you, and to the prince." He bowed, memory of etiquette intact, though joints protested. "How does the little dragon roar this morning?" Jon shifted Aemon forward. "Mostly whistles, but one day." He let the maester peer, small crystal lens glinting as Orwyle inspected pupils and palate. The baby grasped gray-beard tufts, earning a wince as gentle as it was genuine. "No signs of flux," Orwyle murmured. "Color is good. A draught of mare's milk with crushed rosehip will keep lungs strong." He selected a small pewter vial from tray. "Twice daily, when the tide changes." "Will he scar?" Jon asked, voice hushed. At birth, Aemon had been half strangled by twisted cord, leaving a pale band across tender throat. Orwyle's gaze softened. "It fades already. In moon turns, a faint silver thread. He may claim it as proof of dragon's blessing." One brow lifted. "Or as penance born." Jon chuckled, under breath. "He will claim many things, I think." He accepted the vial, tucking it into belt pouch, then rocked the child until lids drooped. Raven calls rose as if gossiping about kings too soon crowned. Jon's mind turned to the letters stacked on his writing table. One from Sansa demanding grain shipments, another from Lord Royce predicting rebellion in Vale Passes, a missive signed by Asha Greyjoy requesting a naval audience. Responsibility pressed heavier than infant weight. Yet when Aemon gurgled, tiny hand patting Jon's chin, the burdens fell away like last winter snow. He pressed lips to the baby's brow, scenting the warm milk breath. Tyrion Lannister stood beside a hearth in the solar that once belonged to Stannis Baratheon. Flames licked copper dogs, reflecting crimson across his scarred cheek. He held a goblet of morning wine, too early, Jon thought, but Tyrion's nerves seldom honored clocks. At Jon's entrance he dipped a courteous nod, gaze flicking newborn with the quick calculation of debts. "I expected to find you berating millers for shorting royal sacks," Tyrion said. "But I see you have better tasks." "Soon enough," Jon replied, settling Aemon into a blackwood cradle Tyrion had commissioned from Pentoshi artisans. Wolves chased dragons across its balustrades. An emblem of union hammered onto an heir's first bed. Daenerys went to see to the kitchens. She fears the Reach lords will judge her by goose fat. "Geese are discerning." Tyrion sipped. "I received word from Old Town. The Archmaesters recorded a dream of the glass candle, a woman with white fire braided down her spine, standing before a weeping wall. They speak of a tempest unborn." Jon scoffed lightly. "Archmaesters speak of many things when wine is scarce." Tyrion shrugged, setting goblet aside. "Perhaps. Yet dreams drive our world more than swords." He leaned against carved mantel. "When I first advised Daenerys, I thought to tame wildfire with logic. Instead, I learned to watch the sparks. Your child is such a spark. Already ravens whisper of a prophecy revived. The promised monarch. Jon rubbed eyelids with thumb and forefinger. Prophecies led us to the brink. Azor Ahai, the prince who was promised. See how those tales ended. He looked at Aemon, heart twisting. Let him be a boy before he becomes a banner. Tyrion's smile turned wistful. If only the world were so patient. He paced a lattice shutter, opening slats to sea glare. The Hightower's beacon flashes green each twilight. Old Town's fleet grows. The Citadel argues that a babe raised by the two greatest land, most feared conquerors in living memory cannot help but stoke fresh war. They call for a conclave. A beat. Fear, my friend, is a relentless scribe. Jon's jaw set. Then let us write something gentler on their pages. Tyrion's mismatched eyes kindled. We shall need ink enough for 7 kingdoms. By midday, the great hall hummed with preparation. Rushes were replaced, banners of Stark direwolves interlaced with Targaryen dragons hung from sconces, and perfumed torches burned cypress to mask lingering scents of eel stew. Daenerys moved through it with regal economy, every nod sending thralls scurrying, every raised brow adjusting seating protocols. Grey Worm consulted silently at her side, and Missandei, returned from beneath the prior turn of moons, oversaw scribes drafting place cards in High Valyrian and Common tongue. Above, ribbed vaults reverberated with hammer strikes as carpenters checked joists for safety under northern snows to come. Jon arrived, cloak shedding spray from courtyard fountains, and paused at the threshold to watch his queen. Not the fiery breaker he had followed across desert and ice, but a woman wielding gentleness as blade. She guided servants to set fruit bowls near salt, so that sweet and brine mingled. She insisted that torches on the western wall be dimmed at dusk, so sunset would paint the stone gold. These were small kindnesses, courtly nonsense perhaps, but they stitched trust between walls that had once echoed only fear. Jon's chest swelled with complicated pride. She sensed him, of course. Her head turned, braids catching firelight. He crossed the hall toward her, ignoring bows and curtsies, until she caught his forearm in greeting. How fares our son? Dreaming of flight. He touched his heart where Emia's weight had rested. Orwyle says he thrives. Relief lifted her lashes. Good. We will need his laughter in this hall. She tilted chin toward dais where 2 thrones stood. Hers wrought anew from melted spears of Cersei's personal guard, his from weirwood shipped south, their arms entwined like lovers. Do we sit there side by side? He thought of the letters, the fears, the dreams of archmaesters. We must. He lowered voice so only she heard. There are those who still see us as rival claims. We must be seen as one body. With one soul. She finished softly. Her hand found his. Servants glanced away as the rulers shared a quiet conspiracy of closeness. Jon's thumb brushed her knuckles, tracing the faint ridge where a blade once met King's betrayal. Forgiveness was still a seedling, but it grew. That night, Aemon fussed as storms rolled in. Lightning forked outside high windows, and thunder boomed, as if old Valyria roared in grief. Daenerys paced circles on wool rugs, humming a lullaby of old Kiskari origin. Her voice wove minor keys, thrumming soothingly through stone. Yet the babe refused calm, writhing against her breast, tiny fingers clawing at air. Jon woke from half-sleep on couch cushions, and rose to stand behind her, arms encircling mother and child. Shh, little dragon, he murmured, voice roughened by dreams. Rain lashed shutters, droplet runnels racing lattice. Then, a distinctive rumble outside, deeper than thunder. Drogon answered tempest with his own note. Daenerys felt it vibrate up through her spine. The child's wail ceased. His head pivoted, wide eyes seeking something beyond walls. Another growl sounded gentler now. The babe cooed. Jon exhaled wonder. He feels it. Of course. Daenerys cradled the newborn closer. The dragons sing to him as they once sang to me. They know he is theirs. Across the courtyard, a colossal silhouette moved. Wings half-mantled to deflect wind. Lightning illuminated Drogon's red-black hide, each membrane wing a cathedral of veins. His great head turned toward the queen's tower, molten eyes glowing. For an instant, the world shrank to a single pulse shared across species. Dragon, child, mother, father. The storm seemed to bow around that moment, its fury pausing in deferential awe. Then thunder cracked anew, and the spell broke, but remained etched in memory. Daenerys kissed Emien's brow, tasting warmth. "Sleep now," she whispered, "for the world waits with sharpened quills to write your tale." Tiny lids fluttered. The babe sighed, body going limp with sudden abandon. She eased him into cradle and draped furs overhead, ensuring his face free for air. Drogon's shadow moved away, content. Jon rubbed tired eyes. "The lords arrive tomorrow." "Tomorrow," she echoed, brushing hair behind ear. "And tomorrow, and tomorrow." She turned to face him fully. "Whatever they bring, we face it together." He drew her close, forehead resting against hers. The drawn bowstring of their shared past loosened a fraction. Rain softened, pattering like whispered promises. Morning unfurled with croaking gulls and the clop of hooves on causeway stone. Banners of Baratheon, Martell, Tyrell, Arryn. Even a tattered Connington griffin, vestige of old loyalties, advanced in color procession across the drawbridge. Jon and Daenerys stood atop parapet, with Emien pressed against Jon's chest, swaddled in a mantle embroidered half direwolf, half dragon. The baby blinked at swirling pennants, mouth gaping in silent awe. Below, armored hosts filed through gate arches, steel bright beneath rising sun. Horns sounded greeting, drums echoed heartbeat rhythms. Tyrion, perched on knee-high stool to their right, squinted over crenels. "If numbers equaled faith, we'd need thicker walls." Jon quirked brow. "Do you see rebellion marching?" "I see uncertainty." Tyrion tugged at his beard. "Uncertainty sharpens quicker than rebellion. But it can be dulled by feast and story." "Then we shall feast," Daenerys declared, hefting newborn higher so banners below glimpsed Targaryen violet set in stark black. A roar rose from courtyard throngs. Some cheer, some muted murmur. But it rolled wholesome as bread baking. Farther up the coast, sails flecked the horizon. Greyjoy krakens and high towers, green-lit beacon, closed distance upon currents. Dragonstone's harbor would swell with ships. Its walls would swell with rumors. Its halls with demands. Yet above it all, a tiny heartbeat drummed. For now, that was enough. Nightfall painted sea and sky alike, moon splitting clouds like a cut pearl. Feast torches leapt gold against vaulted hall. Music of lute and harp, drum and high whistle mingled with hum of voices. High tables overflowed. Dornish peppers stuffed with goat cheese, honey-roasted boar glossy with apple glaze, oysters swimming in pale saffron cream. Emien, milk-sated, slept in velvet basin behind the dais, watched over by Missandei and two unsullied. Jon raised a goblet carved from obsidian. "To peace," he said, voice loud enough to crest across benches. "A fragile bloom we must water with patience." Faces lifted, some with genuine warmth, others stone cold. He drank, letting honey wine coat tongue. When he lowered cup, Daenerys' hand covered his beneath the table. She had taken no wine. Her eyes roved crowd as a dragon surveys meadows, protective, calculating, merciful. Lord Gendry rose first, blue and gold tunic stretched taut across smith-broad shoulders. "To the crown prince," he bellowed, grin bearing blacksmith teeth. "May his hammer strike true." Laughter bubbled, disarming tension. Near him, Lady Asha Greyjoy lifted cup in sly salute. Beyond, Sansa's envoy, Sir Willis Manderly, exchanged guarded glances with Lord Tarly. Single alliances forged in seconds. Tyrion murmured to Daenerys, "Watch Lord Hightower when the babe wakes. He claims Old Town's dawn will not rise under dragon shadow. Yet I saw tears glimmer in his eye at the prince's first wail." He smirked. "He is not immune to small things." Daenerys replied without moving lips. "Few hearts are once a child cries." Jon's hand tightened on hers, warmth pulsing. She returned squeeze. They felt, between them, a delicate string extend from each soul to the sleeping child, and out to every lord and lady, every soldier and scullion, every fisherman anchored beneath cliffs. That thread was fragile, yet threads braided forge ropes. Ropes anchor kingdoms. Dawn crept again, slower, as though day itself hesitated to disturb the murmur of responsibility taking root. Jon carried Aemon across a garden terrace, freshly carved from what had been a neglected battlement. Marble planters overflowed with ghost grass seedlings, imported from far Ashai, their silver stalks reflecting sunrise like polished blades. Daenerys walked beside him barefoot, dew cooling her soles. She had worn a simple gown of midnight wool, belted in white leather. No crown, no sigils. Her hair, unbound, rippled behind her like a comet's tail. Jon, in boiled leather and grey wool, looked more ranger than king. Gardener thralls bowed as they passed. At the terrace's edge lay a shallow reflecting pool. Steam rose faintly, enchanted by a small hot spring uncovered during renovations. He stepped onto basalt lip, balancing child in crook, and watched sky mirrored below. Aemon squealed as light sparked on water. Daenerys laughed, a sound Jon had thought lost forever, and knelt to brush fingertips through warm surface. Concentric ripples spread, warping sky into molten ribbons. Jon spoke softly. "This peace, it feels too still, like deep lake ice that snaps without warning. You distrust calm." She skimmed her hand again. "But calm is not enemy. The wind must rest before storms gather anew. Let us grant respite to dragons, to wolves, to kings and queens." Then, he nodded though tension remained. "I dreamt last night of a throne forged from glass. Our son sat upon it, but the glass melted and water drowned the hall." She met his gaze. "Dreams are riddles, not road signs." She rose, brushing damp from skirts. "We make our own waking paths." Wind shifted, carrying faint croon. Overhead Drogon soared along outer curtain, wings scything the air with slow majesty. From high nests, Rhaegal's clutch of eggs, rescued from rubble and kept under dragon's heat, stirred as if answering. One egg cracked hairline seams, sapphire smoke curling out. Daenerys' breath caught. She and Jon exchanged a look rich with terror and wonder. The world did not wait. A new dragon prepared to hatch. A new prince breathed. Lords gathered, swords sharpened, ravens flew. Yet here, by a pool reflecting first light, queen and king and child drew close. 3 sparks, 1 flame, while above them a dragon wrote burning sigils across the sky. Wordless, the infant stirred, spreading fingers in grasp at nothing. Jon bent to kiss his brow. Daenerys laid her hand atop both their hearts, feeling the triple rhythm. Hers, his, the child's, beating one over the other like braided drums. She spoke then in a whisper that carried more oath than prophecy. "No crown forged by men or dragon flame will harm you, my son. No darkness older than memory will claim you. For your father is the north wind, your mother the dawn fire, and you," she smiled like sunrise burning through storm, "you are the song they were always meant to sing together." Kindled by those words, the baby stilled, content. Beyond the wall, waves hurled themselves against Dragonstone cliffs, roaring approval. Within the keep, servants lit lamps, scribes warmed quills, lords fingered sword pommels, sparrows opened shutters to let light answer prayer. Across 7 kingdoms, ravens carried tiny scrolls inked in trembling hands, the child of dragon and wolf lives. He thrives. He smiles. And somewhere deep under the foundations of the world where old fires yet smoldered, ancient eyes stirred awake, recognizing at last the chord of birth that new history had struck. Change rushed forward on unseen wings, swift and inexorable as dawn. But for this single fragile heartbeat, peace settled over Dragonstone, soft as ash and bright as promise. The pale rim of dawn had only just lifted the sea into bruised cobalt, when Daenerys found herself threading silent corridors whose basalt floors still remembered the storm. Fine films of salt, glittered like powdered ice where drafts had shoved spray beneath the doors. And as she passed, she pressed a bare toe into the damp, half certain that such cold would remind her she was alive and present, not drifting back into the fractured dream that had chased her through the small hours. In that dream, she had seen Aemion upon a glass throne, yet every surface rippled, water trembling inside the panes as though threatening to burst. Now, with stone underfoot and the soft weight of her wool mantle on her shoulders, she commanded each breath to anchor her. A servant carrying kindling paused to bow. She answered with a touch to the girl's elbow, gentleness as command. The girl's surprise became a quick smile before she hurried on, leaving Daenerys with the hush of torches guttering behind her, counting heartbeats like steps toward a future whose shape was still molten. Grey Worm awaited in the antechamber to the great hall, helm tucked beneath one arm. Rain still beaded along the bright curve of his breastplate. He did not speak. His acknowledgement lived in the angle of chin and the way his gaze flicked to the door she must soon walk through. Behind that door the first gathering of the lords would begin within the hour, and their number had swollen with the tide. Tyrells bright as sunset marigolds, a cluster of Dornish in layered reds suggesting sun-bleached cliffs, Royce in his heavy bronze Baratheon blacksmith blues. Daenerys drew a breath, scented with the resinous smoke of pitch-oiled torches, and nodded once. Grey Worm guided her forward, opening the door as if releasing a caged wind. Inside, voices pooled in wary eddies, rather than roaring. The lords had been marshaled by Missandei into arcs that suggested equality without surrendering precedence. But even this subtle architecture quivered beneath long rivalries. Daenerys' silence spread like slow fire. One by one words faltered, chairs scraped, feet shifted. She moved the length of the high table, her gown's train a spill of night behind moon-white hair, until she reached the seat that had once belonged to Stannis, and before him to maesters of dark reputation. She did not sit. She laid a hand upon the carved wolf and dragon crest, feeling the grain worn smooth by Tyrion's polishing. "My lords," she said, voice low yet carrying, "I thank you for braving seas and memory alike to stand beneath Dragonstone's roof. You come bearing hopes, doubts, and burdens of those who hunger beyond these walls. Let us feed them together." The words unfurled without flourish, but she saw them settle, some like balm, others like a challenge slid across a gaming board. Jon entered as she finished, cloak still damp where spray had struck him when he'd walked the battlements with the babe secured at his chest. He stopped at the hall's threshold until every gaze swung toward the swaddled bundle. Then he advanced, boots thudding softly, and only when he stood beside Daenerys did he lower the mantle enough for violet eyes and a fistful of raven curls to show. An audible susurrus, not quite a sigh, not quite a claim, rolled through the benches. Aemion blinked wide, solemn as a young owl, and one of Lord Rowan's ladies pressed a hand to her sternum, face gentling as if she'd glimpsed dawn over her orchards, rather than a child who might reorder crowns. Jon said nothing, but the message in his stillness was clear. Here was the reason swords must stay sheathed. Tyrion, perched on a cushioned stool slightly apart, cleared his throat to break the trance. "Our first order of business is grain," he announced, fingers drumming goblet stem, though he drank only cooled tea. "Winterfell reports blight in the barley that fed half the north. The Reach had promising yields before the early heat. But wagons that should have rolled south from Bitterbridge sit idle because roads near the Mander are waterlogged. Lord Tarley," his nod slid toward the stern man, "claims men enough to carve a pass if we commit royal funds for new bridges." The hall turned its attention from monarchs to logistics, and in that pivot, Daenerys felt grateful for Tyrion's instinct. Kingdoms are held by granaries, not dragonfire. The discussion wound through measures and countermeasures, dappling stone walls with the cadence of bargaining, and while Jon weighed each proposal, Daenerys studied the faces of those who did not speak. Lord Hightower stood rigid, as if the beacon that crowned his citadel had carved his spine into marble. His eyes, gray-green as sea at dusk, flicked often to the baby before veering aside, troubled. Beside him, Sir Baelor Beesbury fingered the vellum of a pocket-charted star map, as if searching heavens for permission. Across the aisle Sansa Stark sat in sable and white. She listened with composure, but under the table her gloved hands knitted and unknitted, a silent testimony to nerves coiled tight. When Ser Willis Manderley rose to volunteer his longships for grain escort, she tilted her head in subtle approval. She would not speak yet. She would hoard her words like a master smith heating iron, only once the coals were perfect. By the hours Tol Lord Gendry was the last to take the floor. Rolling broad shoulders that glistened still, with forged sweat despite embroidered finery. His vow was simple. Storm's End would supply seasoned timber for Tarly's bridges and spare wagons, provided crown mints coin stamped with a hammer sigil to fund apprenticeships across the Stormlands. The barter held an elegance even Tyrion admired, and when Jon accepted, promising royal gold be recast under Gendry's mark, the hall breathed easier. One knot loosened. Many remained. When the council finally recessed, Daenerys left through a side arcaded corridor whose window arches faced the sea. Tyrion accompanied her, boots clicking on flagstones spotted with pale sunlight. "Your restraint served you," he remarked. There were lords bent on taking any hint of temper as proof the dragon's flame still hungers. She smirked, but tension lined her jaw. "I felt each heartbeat seeking weakness," she admitted. "And I recognized mine, the boy. If I had been forced to choose between strategy and his quiet breathing, I would have burned every parchment in that hall." Tyrion's brows knit in sympathy hardened by truth. "That is what they wager on, my queen. They think parenthood softens the scales. It need not strip them entirely, but remember that hearts, unlike dragonhide, can be pierced." "Nice." They turned onto a balcony that overlooked the lower yard. Below, unsullied marched in squares, their sandals slapping in perfect unison, yet at the perimeter children of lesser retainers darted among barrels, pretending to be knights or krakens, as mothers scolded in half-laughs. Daenerys watched a dark-haired boy whirl a stick like a spear. "When war stalks, it trains children before soldiers," she murmured. Tyrion nodded. "Let us hope we keep its lessons theoretical." A sudden trumpet from the rookery shattered the quiet, an alarm, high and urgent. Instinct seized Daenerys. She sprinted, skirts hiked, hair streaming behind, Tyrion hobbling apace. They reached the tower steps, where Maester Orwyle emerged breathless from a door, scrolls clattering from his shaking grasp. "My queen, my king," he panted when they bore down on him, eyes wet with conviction. "The green egg, Rhaegal's last, cracks beyond ordinary measure." His words trembled with more than scientific awe. "But it bleeds smoke the color of nightshade, and the ravens shriek at it. I do not trust what hatches." Jon arrived on the final phrase, lips tight. He took the steps two at a time. Inside, the hatchery stank of brimstone and steaming shell. 3 nurses huddled against a wall, while tendons of blue fire licked from fissures in a massive emerald egg resting in its sandpit. The sound was less crack than scream. Drogon, coiled outside on a jutting parapet, keened a bass lament that rattled mortar. Daenerys ignored the heat that blasted her cheeks and knelt close, palm extended not for touch but communion. Years ago, she had believed fire could not kill the dragonborn, yet she felt her skin prickle with genuine danger. This hatchling was different. It drank heat with such hunger that even stone sweated beneath it. She glimpsed within the cracks an eye, oval and slitted, deeper violet than her own, and in the shadow of that eye she sensed a temper raw as newborn lightning. Jon crouched opposite. "Does it know him?" he whispered, meaning Aemon. She did not answer immediately. The egg split wider, coughing sparks, forcing her back. Smoke coiled around her wrist like a living leash, and for a heartbeat she felt memory. The ash of kings landing under her tongue, the taste of steel betrayal in her breast. But with the memory came purpose more ancient than guilt. Dragons belong to no one and to everyone who earns them. "It will know what we teach," she said, "and what the world forces it to learn." They withdrew before talons pierced shell with a sound like shattering glass. Nurses scattered. Maester Orwyle drew a cloth across his mouth to filter smoke. Outside, the sky gathered dark despite the hour. Storm or sorcery, none could tell. Jon met Daenerys' gaze, and in that shared fear glowed resolution. If this dragon arrived twisted by griefs carried in their blood, they would bend those griefs into strength. By evening a hush held the halls, stunned by word of the hatch. Lords kept to their chambers, praying to new gods and old. Sansa sought Daenerys in the queen's tower, surprising the eunuch guards with her brisk dismissal of formality. She found the dragon queen standing beside a crib where the prince slept, tiny fists loose above the blanket. Smoke residue still streaked Daenerys' cheekbones, ghostly as war paint. Sansa removed her gloves, revealing fingers reddened from frost eruptions on northern roads. "I will speak plainly," she said, voice low so as not to wake the child. Hightower sent a raven before he left Old Town. The Archmaesters debate removing dragon lore from the restricted stacks, fearing more eggs might awaken. If they move openly against you, your alliances in the south will fracture. Daenerys touched damp cloth to her palms as if scrubbing unseen soot. "And what does the Lady of Winterfell propose?" Sansa studied Aemon, eyes softening despite herself. "The North will honor its pledge," she said. "But the North also listens better to wolves than dragons. Bring the boy to Winterfell for a season. Let him laugh in snow. Let the small folk see his cheeks red in our wind. They'll trust a child before they trust your mercy." Daenerys took long seconds to answer, measuring history inside them. Ned Stark's head upon a pike, Robb's corpse riddled by arrows, Jon's own death and resurrection. "Your snow is a crucible," she allowed at last. "Perhaps his fire must meet ice early." She extended her hand. Sansa clasped it, cool fingers on warm. At the midnight, Council Tyrion laid markers across a map, fire painted by torchlight. "If the prince travels north, come the first snows, we must secure roads from Moat Cailin to Winterfell. The neck floods are impassable. We'll need longships through narrow lakes." Gendry frowned, craggy brow shadowed. "My carpenters can retrofit hulls for shallow drafts." Asha Greyjoy leaned elbows to table, sly grin flickering. "And my kraken sails can sweep any fray stragglers from those waters." Jon, turning the lion weight of a carved chessman in his palm, glanced to Daenerys. She inclined her head. "Make it so." Decisions moved like river ice, fracturing then surging. Within the forge toward dawn, Gendry labored alone, hammered sparks flaring around tattoos of old burns. He shaped not swords but delicate rings etched with house sigils. Wolf and dragon braided, sun spear and hammer crossing, kraken and rose linked. Tokens he planned to gift lords upon the babe's naming day. Metal remembers, he thought, and if kinship could be worn, perhaps grudges would dull. Over the anvil he prayed softly to no god in particular, that the rings would encircle more than fingers, they would encircle futures. Maester Orwyle, meanwhile, bent over the still steaming egg fragments arrayed on silken cloth. His quills scratched observations into the journal he intended for the citadel, whether Hightower approved or no. He noted the shell's unusual density, the iridescent striations tracing patterns akin to constellations over Sothorios, the pungent odor reminiscent of burnt cedar. What he omitted, unsure if scholar or heretic, was the shiver that rode his spine when he looked upon the fledgling now sleeping in the grotto where Drogon guarded him. The sense that the cosmos itself had tilted fractionally in anticipation. On the second morning, Lord Hightower requested private audience with the crown. They met in a candlelit library, whose walls bled secrets through every crack of dusty binding. He arrived robes rustling like waves. His entourage dismissed beyond earshot. "Your Graces," he began, standing rather than kneeling. "Old Town harbors no ill against child or dragon. But knowledge warns us, there exist breeds of fire that devour their keepers first. If this new worm carries strange humors, we must consider confinement." The word rang accusatory despite his smooth cadence. Jon's knuckles whitened on chair arms. Daenerys felt Drogon stir outside like a thundercloud gathering static. But she answered calm. "Confinement breeds monsters. Freedom breeds allies. We will raise it under sky, not chains. Maester Orwyle will share every finding." Hightower bowed, yet caution lingered in the downward tilt of his gaze. As he departed, Tyrion exhaled. "We buy peace with transparency," he muttered. "But transparency can show the cracks." Jon responded, "Let them see cracks. They prove the wall isn't false." Daenerys added, and what steps through them will reveal who truly serves realm or self. That afternoon, Grey Worm uncovered a spy's nest. Two scribes bribed by a Taroshi merchant had been copying treasury ledgers and scattering ciphered scraps across the beach to be retrieved by gull-trained ravens. Under interrogation, they named a benefactor known only as the Candlebearer. Tyrion's face paled. The title belonged to a secret order rumored among wine-stained pages in Qarth, a cult that believed dragon blood must water the roots of the world tree in order to prevent time's unraveling. "Superstition with knives," he warned Jon. "They will come." Missandei took over questioning, her calm voice slicing deeper than torture could. She learned shipments of rare green lilies, used in poisons that rendered flesh luminous before decay, had arrived in Driftmark. A plot ripened like rot under sweet fruit. When night fell, Grey Worm posted double guards at every stairwell leading to the nursery. Daenerys could not sleep. She paced the ramparts, wind worrying her loose hair, while below, waves flung themselves to die upon black rock shoals. Drogon drowsed atop the rookery dome, yet kept one eye open, an ember in the dark. She whispered Valyrian lullabies meant for dragons, notes thin and trembling. Eventually the winds answered with softer hands, and she descended to her chamber, heart still thudding. There she found Jon seated before a small iron brazier, Aemon in his lap, both half-wrapped in a bearskin. Father whispered a tale of the wall, of ghosts that cried on the far side of the gate, of dawn that painted armor pink, of friendships soldered by frost. The child listened, blinking slow. Daenerys slipped behind them, encircling both with her arms. Together they watched coals gutter into blackened pillars, and somewhere beyond sense they dreamed identical dreams of snows that glowed under dragonfire without melting. Over the coming days, carpenters harnessed mule trains, churning mud into corduroy roads, while in the bay Greyjoy sailors tested longships modified with retractable keels. Lords walked ramparts in pairs, forging tentative treaties, Rowan with Martell, Royce with Beesbury, yet always each parley ended at the nursery, where they stared in fascination and something akin to devotion at the child who might unify what their swords never had. Aemon surprised them by reaching toward jeweled brooches and laughing whenever a metal surface reflected torchlight. His laughter loosened bolts rusted by years of suspicion. The new dragon, christened Araxes by Daenerys for truths etched in its scales, grew astonishingly. Within 4 days, its wings stretched across the training yard, membranes patterned like storm clouds trapped under glass. Yet it remained gentle, crooning whenever Aemon's cries drifted from the tower. Neither Drogon nor the unseen regal spirits objected. Indeed, Drogon sometimes landed nearby, head bowed as if teaching the fledgling patience. Orwyle recorded everything, scribbling until his wrist ached, while Tyrion joked that historians would curse him for drowning future scholars in parchment. But unrest brewed beyond the island. A hooded rider arrived from the Reach, horse-lathered, bearing news that bandits clad in faith militant rags had torched 3 caravans bound for King's Landing, crying that the Dragon Queen's child heralded the beast among 10,000. Further north, reports reached Winterfell of a man preaching under the Weirwood's bleeding canopy, claiming Jon Snow abandoned his vows to father an abomination. Sansa dispatched knights to disband fireside gatherings before they swelled, yet the rumors traveled faster than hooves. When the next council convened, Daenerys ordered casks of ink and parchment distributed to every lord. "Write your people," she said. "Swear on your honor that you hold the prince beneath your roof right now. Invite them to witness the naming day feast. Truth must gallop alongside lies." Some bristled. Borrell muttered about travel's cost, but none dared refuse. Tyrion suggested also sending minstrels. Songs soften hearts quicker than edicts. Jon approved and pledged half the treasury bar to a tourney of bards. That night the candlebearer struck. A masked figure vaulted from a skiff under the cover of moonless skies, scaling sea-wet bricks to a tapestry gallery adjoining the nursery. Grey Worm's doubled guard slowed the intruder's advance. Still 2 unsullied fell, throats sliced by glassy knives that glimmered with green lily poison. The alarm clanged a single note before Jon, sword already in hand from drill, burst out of a side corridor, and met the assassin in the gallery bathed by starlight. Their blades clashed once, steel against something harder, like crystal. The assassin hissed words in low Valyrian, yet before the second strike could fall a jet of flame jutted through a window arch. Varaxes, small yet fierce, unleashed a cone of purple-white fire that seared the assassin's arm, igniting the poison so that it flared emerald then black. The figure reeled, Jon's sword point found chest, and with a single thrust, the threat ended. In the morning council they examined the weapon, a sword carved whole from dragon glass stitched with veins of obsidian, so pure it seemed to drink light. Its hilt bore a sigil none recognized, a tree whose roots wrapped a dying sun. Orwell's voice shook as he read from an ancient Lycene diary that spoke of a sect dedicated to silencing the dawn, believing that each new dragon stole years from the world's allotted lifespan. If they gather more, he warned, they will carve blades for every babe you might hope to raise. Daenerys ordered vigils doubled, but she also declared the assassin buried with rites of peace. Publicly she spoke, "Let no child of the realm celebrate murder, even of an enemy." Her mercy rattled court, yet when small folk heard that the queen forgave even those who sought her son's blood, murmurs of the mad queen dimmed. In taverns across the crownlands, they toasted the dragon mother, and speculated that perhaps fire could warm rather than only scorch. Winter's first snows dusted the battlements the morning the royal caravan set forth. Jon rode at its head on a coal-black destrier, baby strapped close beneath layers of fox fur, while Daenerys flew overhead astride Drogon, Varaxes weaving patterns below like a shadow stitched to her passing. Lords marched behind, banners snapping crimson and silver against white sky. At the foot of the causeway, fishermen dropped nets to kneel in the slush, blessing the prince with seashell charms. The little one gurgled, reaching stubby fingers toward falling flurries, attempting to catch winter itself. They sailed first for White Harbor, where Manderly vowed whale oil lanterns would guide their fleet through treacherous ice floes. Nights on deck, Tyrion read seafaring charts with Missandei, debating the quickest route while Lady Asha taught Gendry sailor knots. In each stolen moment when duties paused, Jon and Daenerys stood at the prow, cheeks together, watching Aurora Borealis cascade over dark waves, their breath mingling in clouds. They spoke quietly of hopes, of glass-roofed nurseries where dragons, children, and deerwolves might roam, of harvest feasts where Tyrell roses twined stark banners, of songs yet unwritten. Each time fear surfaced, visions of shadow blades or mob fires, they clasped hands until skin warmed thought. At White Harbor, cheers shook the docks. Lord Manderly greeted them in robes bright as summer apples, a deliberate contrast to snowbound quays. He held up Aemon for the crowd to view, and thousands roared, many weeping. Bakers fashioned sweet buns shaped like tiny dragons. Distant pipe players reworked a northern reel into Targaryen minor keys. Torchlit dances spiraled across frozen squares until dawn. Jon joined a reel beside orphan children, laughing when they ordered him spin faster. Daenerys watched from a balcony, heart thudding to a rhythm she had nearly forgotten, the music of common joy. Yet even here shadows clung. 3 nights deep, a rumor surfaced that some in the watching crowd whispered, "Let him claim us but not his mother. The dragon still hungers." The words cut, though they were small stones thrown from faceless mouths. Sansa met Daenerys in Manderly Solar, bringing with her a small carved wolf figurine. "I whittled this when I feared my own first winter," she said, offering it. "Give it to Aemon. Let him keep a piece of the north wherever he goes." The gesture eased an ache Daenerys had not confessed, fear that the North's love for the child would come tempered with ice toward her. She took the wolf, smoothing grain lines grown rich in Sansa's palm oil. "He will carry it like a heartbeat," she promised. When they resumed their journey overland, long ships transported wagons along the frozen lakes, while mounted outriders scouted ahead through marsh fog. One dawn Varaxes darted above the fleet, harrying a pair of giant white owls until they dove into pine gloom. Some swore the dragon's cry resembled laughter. Grey Worm, marching at vanguard, allowed himself the faintest smile. Soldiers who once feared fire now cheered whenever leathery wings churned snowflakes into swirling halos. The last league before Winterfell was hardest. The next twisted tracks, half submerged, forced bridge planks to be lashed hour by hour. Snow thickened to muffling blankets. In the hush, Jon thought often of the words carved into the Night's Watch oath, and the price he once paid to keep them. Yet he also remembered Melisandre's fire showing him glimpses of a child not yet born. A throne built of living wood, a woman ablaze but unconsumed. All those visions converged now, riding upon a single wagon where Aemon slept swaddled. Jon knelt there nightly, telling stories of his own father he never knew, of Lyanna whose song carried on winter wind. They reached Winterfell as twin suns burst across hoarfrost clouds, Drogon alight with dawn on his scales, Vyrex's flickering arcs of copper. The old castle received them with incense of pine smoke and bread. Bran, seated beneath the ancient weirwood, smiled at child and dragons, though his eyes seemed to look beyond them and beyond years. Later, alone with Jon Godswood, the boy who was three-eyed Raven spoke. Threads tighten. Some will snap, teach him humility before he learns might, or the snapping will be his. Jon bowed head, acknowledging burdens older than stone. During the moons that followed, snows piled into ramparts, but within Winterfell's walls warmth spread. Aemon took his first shakily balanced steps on a fur-strewn floor, while Direwolf Ghost padded nearby offering a steadying flank. Varaxes, grounded by blizzards, nested in the Godswood, wings arching like cathedral vaults over the heart tree, whose red leaves drifted against black scales in surreal beauty. Small folk came daily to gaze, leaving baked turnips or knitted mittens as offerings. Children sketched the dragon with soot on limestone. Minstrels rewrote ballads formerly soaked in lament to include refrains of fragile hope. Tyrion established nightly salons where lords debated philosophy as readily as tax policy. One evening, over spiced malt wine, Lord Hightower confessed that seeing the boys' delight chasing candlelight across hall floors had soothed half his fears. "No monster laughs so freely," he granted. In reply, Tyrion raised his cup. "Let us ensure his laughter never dims beneath the weight of our expectations." Yet along the wall, ravens blackened uneasy skies. Gray-cloaked scouts reported flickers of blue flame in forgotten keeps where only dust should remain. Wildlings whispered that the wind beyond the Frostfangs carried voices chanting about a stone child bartered to spirits. Where superstition walked, opportunists followed. A charismatic preacher, styling himself the Shepherd of Twilight, gathered refugees along the King's Road, promising safety in a valley, untouched by dragonfire. His followers began burning effigies of scaled infants, stoking terror. Sansa convened a winter market to draw these restless souls into Winterfell's fold. Under lanterns and floating ribbons, farmers sold frost apples. Smiths hawked ironwood trinkets. Tyrell wine flowed. Jon stood on the steps of the great hall, with Aemon in his arms while Daenerys addressed the crowd, pledging that every hearth would receive a measure of Reach grain and northern honey mead. "This child unites our kitchens," she told them, "and highborn or crofter, we dine from one pot." Cheers fractured the icy air. But beyond torchlight edges lingered men in ragged cloaks, whispering warnings about the Mad Queen. Late that night, as revelers dozed around dying fires, Grey Worm escorted a captured spy, a boy no older than 12, caught carving the shepherd's sigil into the stables. Jon dismissed guards to question the boy alone in a storage loft perfumed by straw and horse sweat. The child trembled but glared defiance until Aemon, toddling with recent confidence, wandered in chasing a wooden direwolf. He bumped into the prisoner's knees and laughed. Something broke within the boy's eyes then. Tears slid down dirt-streaked cheeks. He confessed the shepherd promised gold for each act of sabotage, but delivered only sermons of doom. Jon placed a calloused hand on his shoulder and offered service in the kitchens instead of chains. The boy nodded, sobbing relief. Later, Jon told Daenerys, "Mercy is cheaper than punishment, and sometimes twice as binding." She answered by kissing the scar above his heart. Varaxes scratched skyward again as spring tiptoed south, though winter still held the fields. Bran pronounced the dragon's wings, strong enough to ride the jet streams that carried ravens to Old Town, in 3 days. Daenerys considered dispatching the young worm with scrolls of peace, but Tyrion cautioned, Some maesters would loose scorpions first, questions later. Better we choose human couriers for human fears. Viraxes contented itself skimming battlements, occasionally breathing small gusts of flame at snow cornices, delighting children who squealed beneath crumbling heaps. In the weirwood's shade one twilight, Bran guided Daenerys' hand to a knot in the bark that pulsed faint heat. "All flames are cousins," he said cryptically, "whether from dragon or hearth, forge or life's own blood. Teach him to steward flame, not to wield it out of hunger, and he will mend more than lands." She asked if the child's future could be seen. Bran's pupils widened, bottomless. "Paths branch like veins in a dragon's wing. I see crowns, cages, and seas of glass. But I also see garden gates open wide." He smiled, fragile. "Hope is the path you choose each dawn." 5 moons passed. Grain from the Reach, ferried by Manderley and guarded by Greyjoy krakens, reached northern storehouses. Bridges stood firm over the Mander. Holdings once allied with the Lannisters petitioned to join a new council of trade. Somewhere south, faith militants dispersed when common folk refused their sermons in favor of bards, singing of the wolf dragon, prince chasing snowflakes. The candlebearer cult retreated into rumor. But every victory, Jon reminded Daenerys on quiet walks along the Godswood Wall, was but a sheet of thin ice. "We skate softly," she responded, "with dragons above to warm the cracks." On the eve of the boys' first naming day, Winterfell's courtyard transformed into a maze of pennants and lanterns. Tables groaned under pies shaped like direwolves and dragons locked in dance. Musicians warmed strings beside braziers. Gendry unveiled the rings he had forged. He placed the dragon-wolf circlet upon Aemian's tiny wrist, while lords applauded. The child tried immediately to chew it. Laughter burst freer than any since the long night's end, echoing through towers older than recorded time. Even Lord Hightower laughed, a sound no one recalled hearing before. At midnight, Daenerys carried Aemian to the battlements where Drogon perched, and Viraxes spiraled overhead. Snow drifted in glittering sheets like powdered starlight. She lifted her son high. Below, thousands of torches answered, their flames merging into a single river of gold. Jon stood behind, arms wrapped around her waist, his cheek resting against her plait. Together they spoke, not loudly but with souls flung open. "This realm will not be inherited in blood alone, but in every kindness seeded tonight." Their words fled into winter sky, where perhaps some invisible power captured them. Far to the east beyond the Dothraki Sea, a red comet blossomed, unnoticed by those beneath snow, but perhaps not by things that doze in shadowed jungles or beneath black waters. Yet for the 5 hours that stretched between dusk and dawn at Winterfell, filled with song, with tales swapped beside oak barrels, with quiet forgiveness offered in corners where vendettas once smoldered, the realm rested upon a fragile plateau of peace. And in the heart of that plateau beat a child's wonder as he reached for flakes of ice that sparkled in the lantern glow, believing, in that perfect and momentary innocence, that he could hold winter in his palm without ever feeling cold. In. Wind stalked the ramparts of Winterfell like a living thing, weaving between the crenellations, tugging at the cloaks of the guards whose watchfulness seemed to sharpen now, not against an invading army, but the persistent unknown. Each night grew a little softer as spring crept up from the south, snow melting in shaded puddles, the godswood thickening with the buds of new green. But with each thawed patch of earth, there seemed also a subtle unsteadiness, a sense that peace was not so much won as borrowed. In the main hall, the last embers of the naming feast guttered in the huge hearths, casting long shadows up the banners that now intertwined direwolf and dragon, new sigils woven beside old. Above, Aemian slept in his mother's arms, his hair a tangle of ink black with a silvered sheen, the line of his cheek pressed gently into Daenerys' shoulder. She carried him through the echoing corridors, each torch flicker reflecting off the stones carved and recarved by generations of stark masons, each echo whispering with the voices of ghosts. The weight of her son was comforting, a presence of warmth and purpose, soft and small, but already the source of more gravity than any throne. Daenerys paused in the gallery overlooking the yard, gazing out on snow, slowly receding from the cobbles, where a handful of children dared the new mud with squeals and leaps, their games leaving boot prints, soon to be erased by the next storm or the next day's sun. Jon found her there, moving silently, as he always had, a man accustomed to crossing snow and shadow, unseen. He wore no crown and no sigils, only a simple tunic of soft gray and dark wool breeches, a sword at his hip out of habit rather than need. His hair, grown long over the winter, was tied at the nape, streaked with silver now where stress had marked him more than battle. He smiled at the sight of Daenerys, the curve of it genuine and unforced. He glanced at the sleeping babe, then at her. "He sleeps like he's learned nothing of war," Jon said quietly, almost as if confessing to some half-remembered prayer. "He will," Daenerys answered, voice barely above the hush of the wind. "But not today." She rocked her child, eyes tracing the dance of smoke above the yard. "The world has blood enough in it. Let him dream while he can." Jon leaned beside her against the stone, his hand brushing hers, the warmth of his touch a reassurance that even in the North's hard keep, softness could endure. Together they stood, silent for a while, letting the night cradle them. When Aemon stirred, Daenerys kissed the crown of his head, and Jon stroked his back, sharing a look that needed no words. Later, they carried him back to their chamber, laying him gently in a cradle of carved weirwood and dragonbone, and together watched his chest rise and fall, each breath a fragile promise. The weeks following the naming day saw Winterfell transform further. Thaws returned the streams to motion, and the people, emboldened by the presence of the king and queen, by the living legend of dragons roosted on the towers, set to work with a zeal that was nearly joyous. Sansa orchestrated new plantings, her letters flying south and east to secure rare seeds and clever hands. Gendry, never content to sit at council long, took over the smithy, teaching a new crop of orphans and farm boys to shoe horses, shape nails, and mend armor. The Tyrells sent casks of early honey and seedlings for the gardens. The Martells, arriving with their sun-bronzed retinue late in the month, brought citrus and silken tales of the heat that would soon return. Yet for all this outward healing, a restlessness grew beneath the surface, spreading first in the markets, then in the gatherings at the inn, then in the halls themselves. Rumors of trouble in the riverlands, old Frey vassals banding together to protest taxes they called the Dragon's Levy. A peasant girl who swore she'd seen an owl with scales for feathers and eyes that glowed blue, perching atop a cairn where none had lived for 100 years. Ravens intercepted from the vale that spoke of religious fanatics gathering in secret, their faces painted half black, half white, chanting that Tyrion, whose wit sharpened on worry, summoned Daenerys and Jon to a meeting in the solar, spreading the intercepted letters and half-burned sigils across the table. Missandei read them aloud, her voice cool and precise. "Lord Royce writes that there's an itinerant preacher in the Mountains of the Moon, some say a former maester, who claims that any rule established by the unnatural union of dragon and wolf is cursed, and that doom will fall from the sky before spring ends." She placed the parchment down, expression grave. "And the candle-bearers." She let the words trail off, glancing to Tyrion. He finished for her. Voices dry as sand. "Their numbers dwindle, but what they lack in force, they gain in myth. The burning of their leader in the great hall did not end their faith. It gave them a martyr." He traced a finger along the edge of his wine cup. "Fear breeds faster than hope. We must answer it, not just with edicts and patrols, but with stories, with actions." Jon listened, his eyes dark with thought. "And if actions are twisted to their ends? If every kindness is cast as weakness? No. Then we do not retreat from kindness," Daenerys said, her voice steady as the stone beneath her feet. "We push it further. If they call us cursed, we invite their elders to see the truth. If they say the prince is not of their world, we show them he is flesh, not prophecy. And if they strike—" her hand curled unconsciously, as if around invisible fire, "we do not answer with flame. Not first." Tyrion regarded her for a long moment. "A bold plan, my queen." and perhaps the only one that will last. In the wide. With the return of sunlight, Daenerys rode daily from Winterfell's gates, Aemon in front of her, cradled in a special harness Gendry had devised. Fur-lined, shielded from wind and weather. She went among the crofters and cotters, speaking with mothers by wellheads, with old men repairing fences, with girls braiding flowers into their hair. Jon rode sometimes with her, other days among the laborers in the fields, sleeves rolled up as he hefted stones or lent a hand at the forge. They listened, and in listening, learned the small truths that would not reach a council table. That grain prices pinched more than a lost banner, that the presence of dragons on the roof at night frightened sheep, that many a child dreamt of riding one. The story spread, told at firesides, sung by minstrels who trailed behind the royal party. Not all were true. Some made Daenerys a goddess who blessed the newborn with a touch. Others turned Jon into a giant who wrestled bears. Still others wove Aemon into a hero who would one day slay darkness with laughter alone. And yet, for every wild tale, there was a kernel of something real. A kindness witnessed, a question answered, a fear soothed by presence alone. Veraxis, the dragon hatched at Dragonstone, grew with uncanny speed. At first Daenerys worried, remembering the violence of his emergence, the way the shell had bled smoke, the way his eyes had fixed on Aemon and the world with a strange, searching hunger. But the beast was gentle with the child, and Drogon, for all his formidable size, had taken to overseeing Veraxis' flights with an air of amused watchfulness, allowing the younger dragon to claim territory, but never to stray too far. The presence of the dragons, 3 now, for Rhaegal's last clutch had yielded a second hatchling, pale green and golden-eyed, became both shield and symbol. Those who harbored secret enmity learned caution. Those who loved stories found inspiration. One evening, as dusk stretched pale gold across the battlements, Daenerys and Jon stood watching Aemon toddle between the roots of the godswood, his hands sticky with sap, his laughter ringing high and true. Ghost padded beside him, tail waving, and the little dragon, Veraxis, curled around them, nose nudging the prince with a gentleness at odds with its terrifying appearance. The sight drew a crowd, kitchen maids lingering with baskets, old Sir Roderick shuffling in from the yard, Tyrion and Gendry and even Sansa, who stood a ways apart, arms folded, eyes bright with something that might have been longing or pride. "He's fearless," Jon observed, shading his eyes. "He knows he's protected," Daenerys said. "By dragons, by direwolves, by us. Will it always be so?" Jon's voice was low, the question a shadow beneath the light. Daenerys watched her son's small hand rest on Veraxis' brow, watched the dragon's eyes narrow in pleasure. "For as long as we are able," she said. "And after that, by the stories we leave behind." A moment passed in quiet. Sansa came to stand beside them, nodding at the child. "He'll remember these days. Even if he forgets the faces, the warmth will stay." She hesitated, then, "The North remembers kindness, even if it cannot always show it." Daenerys smiled, a real smile, and took Sansa's hand. "That is all I could hope." But even as spring uncurled its fingers, trouble moved elsewhere. News came from the riverlands of a small village burned in the night, the sign of a flaming tree scrawled in ash on the old sept stones. A group of sellswords, once loyal to House Bracken, had taken up the Candlebearer's creed and raided a Tyrell grain caravan, killing all save a girl they sent back to Highgarden with a warning. "No bread for Dragonborn?" In the Vale, Lord Royce himself was nearly ambushed by zealots as he traveled the mountain passes. Only the arrival of Aaron's falcons overhead and a quick-thinking knight saved him. At council in the hall, the news was received with a hush that bordered on fear. Lord Hightower spoke first, his voice grave. "We have peace, but it is brittle as ice in spring. There are those who would see it shattered to see what rises from the cracks." Sansa spoke next, her tone steady, iron beneath velvet. "We cannot answer with fire, not unless we wish to feed their stories. Every time a dragon so much as flies over a field, 100 old men remember Old Town burning. We must be clever. We must be swift." "Mise Pierre." Gendry suggested patrols doubled, roads washed. The bards who traveled with them trained to watch for unrest as well as to sing of peace. Missandei proposed sending letters, not only to the lords, but to the heads of every sept, every septa and priest and priestess in the 7 kingdoms, inviting them to Winterfell for a great council at midsummer. Let them see the child. Let them ask their questions. Let them see there is no darkness in him. Daenerys agreed, and the invitations were written, stamped with the sigil of the joined houses, carried by trusted riders and ravens alike. The lords who received them replied cautiously, some with curiosity, some with veiled suspicion. The High Septon himself wrote a measured response, promising to send his own eyes and ears. The weeks passed, and as the Council of Faith drew near, Winterfell bustled with preparations. Markets blossomed with travelers from across the realm, Dornishmen in flowing linen, Stormlanders in thick wool, Tyrells in their new spring greens, Septons in pale blue and gold, red priests from across the sea. The walls were hung with banners in every color, and for once, the snow seemed content to retreat. Veraxes perched on the broken tower, watching the comings and goings, his scales gleaming copper in the sun. Aemon, now walking confidently, charmed the visitors with his laughter and stubborn curiosity. He tugged at the robes of the High Septon's envoy, demanding to know what the beads meant. He led a septa by the hand to the heart tree to show her a nest of ravens. More than once, Daenerys was called to rescue him from a crowd of children who had elected him their king and crowned him with woven willow. Through it all, Jon watched, smiling, yet his eyes never left his son for long. The council itself was held in the godswood. The highborn and the humble gathered beneath the ancient branches, surrounded by the smell of earth and sap. The High Septon's voice was clear as he questioned Daenerys, Jon, and even, gently, the prince himself, asking about omens, about prophecies, about what place a dragon's son might have in the realm. Jon answered first. I was born bastard. I wore the black. I've seen the dead walk and the living betray. I've known prophecy and I've known love. I would choose love, I would choose hope, not because it is easy, but because it is what remains when the rest has failed. Daenerys followed, her words measured. I was called breaker of chains, yet I have forged new bonds here. I know the price of power. I wish for my son not to rule with fire and blood, but to rule with mercy, if he must rule at all. Neri, the High Septon considered, and then spoke for all to hear. The gods do not choose as men choose. Sometimes they send a storm, sometimes a seed, sometimes what is feared is what heals. He raised his hands. Let there be peace. Let the boy grow. A ripple went through the crowd. Some, like Lord Hightower and Lady Tyrell, nodded. Others, wary, kept their thoughts close. But the council ended without blood, and that in itself was victory. Summer crept up the north like a dream. The fields greened, the rivers ran clear. The dragons, Drogon, Veraxes, and the green hatchling, took to the skies by day, drawing wide arcs that became legend in every hamlet and holdfast. Aemon rode sometimes with Daenerys on Drogon's broad back, his shrieks of delight carrying far over the fields. Sansa's plans for the harvest prospered, and in the small folks' hall stories shifted. The dragon's son, they called him. Not the cursed prince, but the bright one. He was seen in the kitchens with flour on his cheeks, chasing kittens, being scolded for upending a bowl of honey into the water barrel. Each small act, each moment of laughter, did more than armies could have done to ease the realm's fear. In the solar, as dusk crept through the windows, Daenerys and Jon sat together, watching Aemon sleep. His dreams were peaceful. A smile played at the corners of his mouth. Jon brushed Daenerys' hand with his own, and for a long moment neither spoke. Then softly, we may have bought peace, but it is not yet paid for. And Emmuel, Daenerys nodded, looking down at her son. We will pay, in patience, in forgiveness, in showing again and again that fire need not destroy. Jon looked at her, his eyes full of the future's uncertainty. And if the world demands blood, then we will answer with life, Daenerys said. We will answer with him. Elsewhere darkness still moved. The candle-bearers did not vanish, nor did the old hatreds die. There were rumors of ships gathering off the stepstones, of a new king crowned in Lys, who claimed descent from Maegor the Cruel, of a sorcerer in the ruins of Harrenhal raising crows to carry his words across the winds. But for now, in Westeros, in Winterfell, peace held. In the final days of summer, as the last stars faded before dawn, Daenerys stood on the ramparts and watched the sun rise over a realm more whole than it had been in her lifetime. Below her, Jon walked in the gardens with Aemon in his arms, the boy's hair catching the gold of the morning. She felt, for the first time, that hope was not a fragile thing, that it could be built, day by day, with patience and courage and the stubborn refusal to answer hate with hate. Aemon looked up, laughing, and as the dragons called to the dawn, his laughter seemed to join them, as bright and wild as any hope Westeros had ever known. And somewhere in the deeps of the earth, beneath the stones, beneath the bones of old kings and lost queens, the land itself listened, and remembered, and was glad. E.K. It was the fourth summer of peace, and it came not as a triumphant festival, but as a season almost unremarkable in its gentleness. Days lengthening, the sun carving gold out of every inch of field and forest, the sea's winds tempered and sweet. In Winterfell, the walls were thick with moss, and banners of wolf and dragon had faded from new-stitched glory into something weathered, comfortable, and beloved. The godswood was a riot of life. Ravens scolded from branch to branch. The heart tree's leaves blushed scarlet in the heat, and at its roots Aemon lay stretched on his back, a wooden sword discarded at his side, his eyes chasing clouds. He was nearly 5, tall for his age, and every inch the contradiction of his lineage. Black curls wild as summer grass, eyes a shifting violet that sometimes held gray within their depths, a nose straight and proud, a chin stubborn. He learned to run before he learned to walk, to climb before he read. Daenerys found him in the tallest tree more often than in the nursery, and if Ghost was ever missing, he would always be found at Aemon's heels, his white fur streaked with dirt, tongue lolling. The boy was not coddled. Jon saw to that. Sansa too. He mended nets with fishermen, fetched wood for the hearth, swept out stables, and was as often scolded as praised. Daenerys, though, taught him other things. How to hold fire in the palm of his hand, a candle flame, carefully cupped so that it neither died nor burned. How to read the oldest stories in the darkest corners of the library, stories that began not with dragons, but with people hungry for bread, for love, for meaning. She taught him to speak High Valyrian and the common tongue, and bits of the old tongue of the north. In the still hours of night, she taught him to sing the lullabies her brother Viserys had once mocked, the ones her mother whispered before memory blurred into legend. He would fall asleep with her voice in his ear, never quite sure whether the dragon tales in her song were memory or promise. At the other end of the keep, Jon knelt in the training yard beside the boy. "Grip higher," Jon would say, voice quiet, correcting Aemon's hold on the wooden sword. "It isn't just strength. Remember balance. Watch my feet." Aemon, sweat beading at his temples, tongue poked between teeth, imitated every stance. He watched his father with worship that bordered on reverence, and Jon, quiet, patient, sparing with praise, gave him not only the sword, but the sense that power was not a birthright, but a duty, heavier than steel. One afternoon, after hours of drilling, Jon sat with Aemon on the edge of the wall and pointed east, where the forests rolled away toward the distant vale. "Do you remember the lesson of the wall?" he asked, his voice nearly lost in the wind. Aemon nodded, solemn as only a child can be. "The shield that guards the realms of men." Jon smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. "Aye. But the wall was more than stone and ice. It was men who chose to stand for something. You will stand for many things, someday. And you must choose every day to stand for the right ones, even when it's hard." "That's my way." Aemon's face screwed in thought. "How will I know it's right?" Jon answered, "Listen to your mother, to your kin, to your own heart. Listen especially when you wish to act in anger. Sometimes right isn't what you want, but what's needed." Peace, Daenerys was learning, was a dance of compromises. Lords came to her at Winterfell not for edicts but for mediation, land disputes, grain shares, marriages to broker. The dragons were never far from the hall. Viraxes was full-grown now, long as a ship and twice as agile in the air, scales shimmering copper in the sun. Drogon, gray-muzzled, but still mighty, dozed on the eastern ramparts, rising at intervals to patrol the sky. The green hatchling, now named Tessarion, was unruly, vain, and petulant, prone to snapping at shadows and ignoring any call but Aemion's. Most days the realm was stable. Lords feasted and squabbled, merchants bartered, knights trained, minstrels sang, children played, ravens flew. Some troubles never ended, bandits, drought, old rivalries simmering at the margins. But these were old as the hills, and most could be soothed by coin or counsel. The candlebearers were all but vanished. Faith militancy withered after a harsh winter and a bountiful spring. The threat, when it came, arrived on the wings of ordinary ravens, not dragons or crows. Missandei, who had become the realm's chief scribe and mediator, brought Daenerys a letter sealed in the blue wax of the veil. Lord Royce had died, his heir unproven and young. There were whispers of a blood feud rising in the mountains. Mountain clans rallying to an exiled knight, a bastard who claimed kinship with the Arryns, and more dangerously, old blood magic from the crypts beneath the Eyrie. Tyrion, still the Hand, called council in the solar. The room was warm, filled with the scent of pine and parchment. Sansa sat near the window, the lines in her face deeper, the hair at her temples now streaked with silver, her gaze never less than sharp. Gendry, sturdy and sunburned, stood with his arms folded. Missandei unrolled the missive and read the details. A movement of arms, a sudden vanishing of silver from the treasuries, rumors that the bastard Arryn had gathered wildlings from beyond the wall, men who would fight for plunder and the hope of a freer world. Jon listened with the gravity of the North in his posture. Daenerys beside him studied each face. Tyrion's voice, as always, was the first to break the silence. "We cannot send dragons, at least, not first. If we do, the songs change again. Fire and blood, the old lie, becomes truth anew." Jon agreed. "If the wildlings are there, they are my responsibility. Let me go, speak to them. They know my face." Sansa, quietly. "It must be more than a warning. Offer them land, a stake in the realm. If they lay down arms." Gendry, "And if they won't." Daenerys, "Then we show them there is justice, but no cruelty. The boy Arryn must be brought to parley, not as a prisoner, but as a guest." Melisandre. It was agreed. Jon would ride north with a small company, Sansa's men and his own, and seek a meeting with the new claimant. Gendry and Missandei would oversee the building of new granaries in the Vale to sweeten the offer of peace. Daenerys would remain, ruling from Winterfell, the dragons close at hand, but unseen. The road north from the Eyrie was treacherous, narrow, winding, steep, with the shadow of bandits in every gully and switchback. Jon rode at the front, Ghost at his side, a banner of truce fluttering white. The wildlings greeted him with wary eyes, remembering the man who'd once been their brother. The bastard Arryn, tall, flame-haired, bold-eyed, came out under a flag of his own, his sword in plain sight, but sheathed. They met at a stone ring above a misty veil. Words were brief at first, stilted, Jon careful with every phrase. The wildlings grumbled that they had no fields, no homes, that the lords of the Vale treated them as beasts. The bastard Arryn spoke of oaths broken by lords, of promises kept only by the edge of a sword. Jon answered every complaint with an offer. Land for those who would settle peacefully, a place in the militia for those who would defend the realm, gold for building, a say in the council for each clan. It was more than any king had ever offered them. The parley stretched into night, a fire burning between the camps, ale shared, stories traded of the wall and its fall. Jon spoke of the wars he'd seen, of the cost of hate, of the peace his own son enjoyed, a peace that was earned every day. At dawn a bastard Arryn took Jon's hand and clasped it. sealing the peace in the wildling fashion, wrist to wrist, scar to scar. At Winterfell, news of the truce arrived with a flush of relief. The wildling clans began their migration south, guided by Sansa's men, watched by the dragons as they crossed the neck. Some old bloodlords grumbled, but most, after seeing wildling children with faces pinched by hunger, offered grain and employment. Some even took wildling wives or husbands, and within the year the borders of the Vale were quieter than they'd been in a generation. It was not only war that threatened peace. In the south, in Old Town, the maesters gathered for a great conclave, the first in many years. They debated, long into the nights, the meaning of the dragon's return, whether it portended the end of days or a new age of learning. Maester Orwyle, now ancient, traveled with Missandei to the citadel, carrying with him books Daenerys had written herself, histories not only of kings but of the mothers, the bakers, the soldiers, and smiths who had built the new realm. Missandei spoke in the hall of the citadel, her voice ringing in the stone. "We have lived through fire and through darkness. Now we must teach each child not only to survive, but to understand, to read, to question, to hope." Some maesters muttered, but more nodded. When she was done, the Archmaester of History rose, and in a rare act, bent his knee before the woman from En Eith, the breaker of chains, and the realm's queen by marriage and deed. At court, Aemon grew in strength and in willfulness. He learned to ride with Jon, to read with Daenerys, to train with Sansa's guard, to swim in the river with wildling boys. He was a terror in the kitchens, an angel in the sept, a storm wherever he ran. He spoke High Valyrian, common, and the old tongue, switching between them as mood or mischief struck. The dragons obeyed him, but no more than they chose. Veraxes let him fly, wings stretched wide above the snow-dappled fields. Tessarion ignored him unless bribed with fresh meat. Drogon, old now, allowed only quiet petting, his eyes dark with memory. But it was not power that marked Aemon, it was curiosity. He asked endless questions, of the old men who remembered Aerys, of the small folk who had known only war, of Tyrion, who never answered without a riddle or a joke. He watched the world, and the world watched him in turn. One morning, as autumn crept toward the hills, Daenerys woke to find Aemon gone from his bed. Panic fluttered at her throat, until she heard laughter on the ramparts, and found him standing there with Jon, watching the sunrise burn away the last wisps of fog. He looked so small, so impossibly young, but also full of a wisdom she knew neither blood nor teaching could bestow. "Will I be king?" he asked her, the question coming out as simply as a request for breakfast. She sat beside him, Jon kneeling to take his hand. "Only if the people wish it," Daenerys said gently. "A crown is a burden. It is not a gift." Jon added, "The world will try to shape you. You must decide who you are, before they do it for you." Aemon looked at his hands, at the sky, at the fields below. "I want to fly," he said. "And I want to build things. And I want everyone to have bread. Is that foolish?" "Never," Daenerys said, pulling him close. "Those are the dreams that change the world." Jon ruffled his hair. "But you must also be ready to fail, and to try again." Aemon looked between them, then out across the realm. "I will remember," he promised. Winter came again, as it always did, harsh and sudden. The fields froze, the wolves howled, and the dragons curled closer to the fires. Yet the people did not starve. The granaries were full, and for the first time in living memory, wildlings, Northmen, and Reachfolk feasted together. Tyrion presided over a festival of riddles and drinking. Gendry raced a team of wildling smiths across the yard to see who could make a horseshoe fastest. Missandei organized a tournament for children, with prizes for reading and for kindness. Sansa distributed blankets and honey cakes, the Queen of the North in all but name. Through it all, Aemon watched, learned, and laughed. At night, Daenerys would find him asleep among his books, a wooden sword tucked beneath his pillow, a wolf pup at his feet. Jon would carry him to bed, whispering stories of old kings and braver times. On the longest night of the year, as the fires burned low and the stars shone white, Daenerys sat with Jon and Aemon before the hearth. They spoke not of war or rule, but of love, of memory, of what it meant to build a home. There will always be darkness, Jon said. But together, we are the light. Daenerys nodded, brushing a curl from Aemian's brow. You are our hope, she whispered. Not because you will rule, but because you will choose, and choose again, to make the world new. And Aemian, half asleep, answered, I will try. In years to come, the songs would speak of the child raised by dragon and wolf, whose laughter was a herald of peace, whose courage was not in battle, but in the daily work of making a kingdom whole. Some said he would never wear a crown, others that he was the true king in every heart. It mattered little to those who lived the peace he brought. Dragons still soared, direwolves still prowled, winter still came. But in Winterfell, and beyond, across all the realms, children dreamed of flying, of building, of sharing bread. And every night, a mother's lullaby and a father's quiet strength promised them a dawn brighter than any that had come before. Omniindam. The great bells of Winterfell rang long into the cold dawn, their voices rolling out across the frosted fields and the patchwork of tents and cottages that had grown like a second city outside the walls. It was the day of the great harvest moot, the day every autumn when lords and small folk alike gathered in the old northern way to pledge their yields, their grievances, and their loyalty. In past ages, the moot had been a time of fear, tribute demanded at sword point, justice meted out by grim lords from behind wolf's head banners. Now, under Daenerys and Jon, it was a festival, as much a celebration as a reckoning, and Aemian, now 7, was the wonder and pride of all assembled. The boy was in the stables at dawn, brushing down his pony, boots muddy, cheeks ruddy from the morning's bite. He hummed a tune under his breath, one his mother had taught him, a lullaby from a city across the sea, about silver rivers and dragons circling over green grass. He knew the words in Valyrian and in the common tongue, and as he worked, he tried them in the guttural dialect of the north, just to see if the horses minded. Ghost padded nearby, untroubled by the commotion in the yard, his red eyes on the boy, ears swiveling at each new sound. When Jon arrived, Aemian grinned and scrambled up to stand in the stirrups, arms out like wings. Will the moot be boring? He asked. I heard old Nan say the lords will argue about grain all day. Jon tugged gently on the boy's belt, steadying him. It depends who you listen to. If you only listen for argument, that's all you'll hear. If you listen for what people hope for, you'll hear more than you think. Aemian considered, still wiggling with the impatience of youth. And if I listen for secrets? Jon raised a brow. Then you'll have to decide what to do with them. Secrets are heavier than they look, Aemian. The boy nodded, then slid to the ground, running ahead toward the bustle at the gates. Jon followed, quietly proud, letting him vanish for a moment into the growing crowd. By mid-morning, the yard was awash with color and sound. Merchants from the Reach, ironborn traders in patched furs, Dothraki scouts with ribbons in their braids, Dornish minstrels with sun-dappled lutes, all mingled with the local farmers, knights, and village girls in their best cloaks. Great barrels of cider steamed beside braziers. Banners of every northern house, old and new, fluttered alongside the red and black of Targaryen and the stark white wolf of House Stark. The smell of roasting pork and sweet apple tarts drifted through the air, and children darted beneath the tables, clutching sugared nuts and prizes won in games of strength and wit. Daenerys presided over the moot from a raised dais beneath the heart tree, her silver hair loose beneath a circlet of winter roses. Her cloak, worked in dragon-scale embroidery, shimmered when she moved. She held court with the calm assurance that had only deepened since her earliest days in Westeros. Her voice as steady in council as it had ever been in war, her laughter warmer now, her gaze sharper. The years had softened some lines and sharpened others, and the folk of the north, so long suspicious of Southron queens, now looked to her as their own. Beside her sat Sansa, in furs white as new snow, her hair caught up in the style of old queens of winter. Her children, 2 bright-haired, blue-eyed girls and a sturdy, silent son, watched with wide eyes as the lords filed past to offer gifts and petitions. Tyrion, still hand of the queen, scribbled notes and sipped wine at her right hand, his hair more white than gold, his wit as quick as ever. Gendry, Lord of Storm's End and now master of much of the realm's smithing, arrived late, his boots muddy, his laughter booming. Aemon joined his mother, slipping into the seat between her and Sansa, greeting the other children with the ease of a boy at home, among both highborn and small folk. He whispered to his cousins and wriggled until Daenerys squeezed his shoulder, and he quieted, listening. The moot began with pledges of harvest, Manderleys with barrels of herring and casks of wine, Umbers with piles of furs and cured meats, Karstarks with bundles of barley, wildlings from the new gift with woven baskets of fruit and nuts. Each house presented its offering, and Daenerys thanked them in their own tongue, her words winning nods and a few shy smiles. Then came the grievances. A mill flooded by a careless neighbor's dam, 2 houses disputing the borders of a pasture, rumors of a poacher in the king's wood. Daenerys heard each plea, consulted Sansa and Tyrion, and gave judgment. Firm but fair, her decisions favoring none, least of all herself. A queen's justice is not for her friends alone, she said, and the moot murmured approval. As the day lengthened, games filled the fields. Archery, wrestling, horse races, contests of riddles and songs. Aemon excelled in none, but played in all, joining wildling boys in a foot race, trading jokes with Dothraki scouts, losing gracefully in a riddle contest to a sharp-tongued septa from White Harbor. Wherever he went, people smiled, drawn by the brightness of his curiosity, the warmth of his laughter. He tried every food, begged a turn at the lutes, listened rapt to an old sailor's tale of sea dragons and moon maidens. He watched his mother from afar, trying to see her as others saw her, not just a queen, but the woman whose voice settled storms. The dragons were not present. Drogon had flown south to the Stormlands with Gendry, carrying a load of rare ore and returning with a shipment of new hammers and swords for the Watch. Varaxes and Tessarion roosted at the edge of the woods, hidden from most eyes, but every so often a shadow passed across the field and children would squeal, pointing to the sky. At sunset, fires were lit in great rings around the yard, and Daenerys called for the last business of the day. "Is there any who would challenge the peace of the realm?" she asked, her voice ringing clear in the cooling air. There were a few mutters, a cough, but no open dissent. Then a woman stepped forward, old, hunched, her hair a mass of gray. She wore no sigil, only rough wool and a necklace of stones. "I have come from the west," she announced. "From the ruins of Fair Isle. There are whispers, ships seen on the horizon, black sails with no banners. My people are afraid." Daenerys listened, her eyes intent. Tyrion shifted in his seat, his face darkening. "The Ironborn," he murmured. The old woman shook her head. "Not Ironborn, though they sail like them. They burn villages but take nothing. They leave signs, strange glyphs, painted in blood on stone." Sansa's gaze sharpened. "Have you seen these ships?" "No," the woman said. "But my son has. He is there now with the last of our men. We beg for help." "Dan?" Daenerys nodded. "You will have it," she promised. "Tomorrow, a party will ride west. You are under the protection of the crown." The moot broke into smaller gatherings, concern rippling through the crowd. The peace was sturdy, but not immune to fear. Jon, who had listened from the edge of the field, joined Daenerys, voice low. "I'll ride at first light. Gendry will join me when Drogon returns." Daenerys squeezed his hand. "I'll send Aemon with you." Jon blinked. "He's young. He needs to see," Daenerys replied. "The world is not all song and feast. If he's to rule, he must know hardship and danger, and the meaning of mercy in the face of fear." "Then, Daenerys." Jon was silent a moment, then nodded. "We'll ride together then." That night, Aemon lay in his chamber, staring at the flickering shadows on the ceiling. Ghost curled beside him, a warm, heavy comfort. He could hear music from the yard, the soft strum of a harp, the laughter of the lords. He thought of the old woman, of black sails, and the look in his mother's eyes. He was not afraid, but he was awake. Daenerys came to him, settling on the edge of his bed. She ran her hand over his hair, untangling knots, her face gentle in the half-light. "Tomorrow you ride west with your father," she said. He looked up, eager. "Truly?" "Truly. But you must listen to him, and to the world. Ask questions. Help where you can. But above all, remember that you are not just a prince, not just my son. You are the hope of this land. Let no act of cruelty, no fear change that." He nodded, determination in his face. She kissed his brow, whispered a blessing in Valyrian, and left him to his dreams. The ride west was long and cold. The party, a mix of Stark riders, wildlings, reachmen, and a handful of Dothraki, moved quickly across the fields, through villages shuttered against the chill. They reached Fair Isle on the third day, finding it as the old woman had described. A shell of burned cottages, fields trampled, animals scattered. Aemon rode close to Jon, his eyes wide. "Did the dragons do this?" he asked quietly. Jon shook his head. "No, men did. Sometimes men do things worse than any dragon." Aemon dismounted, moving among the villagers who remained. He helped a boy no older than himself repair a fence, gave an old man his own water flask, listened as a woman wept for a daughter taken by the raiders. He asked questions, about the ships, about the signs, about what the villagers needed most. At night around the fire, Jon spoke to the village elders. "You are not alone. The realm remembers you." He promised aid, sent riders for food and tools, posted guards on the shore. Aemon listened to the stories of the old men, of the days before dragons, before the war, before the world had changed. He asked what they missed most. "Peace," an old fisherman said, looking into the flames. "Not silence, but peace. The knowing that you can work and eat and sleep, and the world will still be here when you wake." When the black sails came, it was with little warning. The watchman's cry split the night. Jon and the Stark men were ready in minutes, swords bared, shields raised. The raiders swept ashore in a roar of oars and torches, faces masked, weapons gleaming. They moved like ghosts, silent but for the clang of iron. Aemon was kept behind the main line, Ghost beside him. But he watched, heart pounding, as his father fought, calm, focused, never cruel. Jon shouted orders, sent men to shield the children, rallied the line. The battle was brief, but fierce. The raiders, seeing their attack repelled, set fire to the shore and fled back to their ships. One lingered, wounded, staggering through the surf. Jon called to him, offered quarter, but the man spat and lunged. Aemon, without thinking, ran forward, Ghost at his side. He met the man's eyes, cold, desperate, and raised his arm, calling out words he barely understood. Valyrian, taught in secret by his mother. Fire did not leap from his hand, but the wind seemed to shudder, and the man faltered, falling to his knees. Jon and the others rushed to subdue him. Later, Jon scolded Aemon, not for his courage but for his recklessness. "You must not risk yourself. Not yet. Not without knowing the price." Aemon nodded, chastened. "I didn't mean to. I didn't want anyone to die." Jon hugged him fiercely. "That is what will make you a better king, if ever you must be one." The next days were hard but full of meaning. The villagers rebuilt, helped by the riders and by Aemon, who fetched water, carried messages, and learned to mend a broken net. He saw pain and anger and sorrow, but also laughter and gratitude. He wrote letters to his mother each night, describing what he saw, what he felt, what he hoped. The source of the black sails remained a mystery. The captured raider, under Tyrion's questioning, revealed little, only that he sailed for a lord across the sea, one who wanted chaos, not conquest. But the villagers were safe, and the realm stood firm. When they returned to Winterfell, the whole castle turned out to greet them. Daenerys swept Aemon into her arms, holding him long and tight. "You have changed," she whispered. "I have seen more of the world," Aemon said. "It is hard, but it is good." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "That is all I could wish." The years turned. Aemon grew in strength and in kindness, learning from every journey, every lesson. The realm endured new challenges. A harsh winter that tested every storehouse, a brief pox in the riverlands, rumors of war in the free cities. But through it all, the king and queen, the prince and the dragons, held the peace. By the time Aemon was 10, he was known in every corner of Westeros. The prince who built bridges with his own hands, who sang in the markets, who listened at the hearths of strangers. When Daenerys grew ill for a time, he sat by her bedside, reading from the old stories, caring for her as she had cared for him. Jon, never far, guided him with a gentle hand, teaching him not just the sword but the meaning of honor and sacrifice and love. When Varaxes took Aemon flying for the first time, really flying, not as a child clinging to his mother, but as a rider with a purpose, the people gathered to watch. The dragon soared over fields, circled the wall, dove over the trident, its shadow a promise of power and protection. Aemon, astride, felt the whole world open beneath him. And in that rush of air, that wild, unbridled freedom, he knew at last what it meant to be both a Targaryen and a Stark. Both fire and ice, both dreamer and doer. In the years to come, the realm would face new trials. There would be storms, both of weather and of politics. There would be old enemies returned in new forms, and friends lost to time or folly. Yet throughout it all, the legacy of Daenerys and Jon, of the child they had raised to rule not with fear, but with wisdom, would hold. Children in the north grew up not dreading the dragons, but dreaming of them. In the Reach, in the Stormlands, in Dorne, in the distant isles, the tales of the prince who listened, who learned, who dared, who forgave. These tales bloomed like wildflowers where once only thorns had grown. And so, with each harvest, with each winter's thaw, with each song sung by the fireside, the story continued, of a child born of fire and frost, who grew to bind a broken world, not with chains but with hope. By the time Aemon reached his 12th name day, Winterfell was again a kingdom unto itself, yet its banners fluttered in every great hall from the arbor to the last hearth. The old ways and the new had fused not by decree, but by a decade of tireless presence, a queen's tireless hands tending fires, a king's silent hours in the saddle, a child grown before every eye and heart in Westeros. The long peace that Jon and Daenerys had forged was not perfect. No such peace is. Yet in the flickering lanterns hung along every village green, in the busy hum of forges and the laughter of children in the great square, it endured. The dragons, Drogon, now slower and shaggier, Varaxes and Tessarion, sleek and proud, had become more than omens or weapons. They were guardians, their shadows a shield not just for lords, but for the lost and the lowborn. Their presence allowed for a strange magic. Fear kept distant pirates and restless exiles at bay. Yet within the realm, their flight signaled a promise that nothing was truly impossible. Aemon's life was now a constant circuit between every castle, keep, and field. When he rode with Daenerys to the Reach, he met with House Tyrell's youngest, Lady Elaine, and saw glasshouses where lemons and roses grew in midwinter. When Jon rode north, he brought his son to the Wall, now a half-ruined monument manned by wildlings and Northmen who called themselves Watchers but saw more trade than trouble. It was in these journeys, with the wind roaring past his ears and ghost or a dragon pacing his passage, that Aemon learned the cost of ruling. The small folk revered him in the south, where his foreign tongue was a marvel. In the north, his laughter among the sheepfolds won even the gruffest shepherd's trust. Yet there was a restlessness in the prince, a sense sometimes that the whole of Westeros could fit beneath his feet and still leave some yearning unmet. One late autumn, a council was called in Winterfell, the largest in years. Sansa and Gendry arrived first, their own children in tow, each older and taller than Aemon remembered. Lord Hightower rode with a fleet of wagons carrying books and gifts from Old Town. Lady Martell brought a little lion cub for the queen, who laughed to see it tussle with ghosts. Even the Ironborn came, bearing salted fish and sullen good manners. For the seas were quiet now that the dragons patrolled the sky. Daenerys opened the council beneath the great heart tree, with banners draped from every branch and lords seated in careful order. "We're not one people by birth," she began, "but by oath and by bread and by the fire that holds back the dark. Here, we decide what world our children will inherit." Nanin, Tyrion, wizened now, his beard snowy, took the floor with a story. How the last king to gather all Westeros had trusted only in swords, and so found only swords at his throat. "If we are to last, we must build not just walls, but bridges," he finished. "Not just ships, but songs." The debate was fierce. The lords of the Westerlands, led by a cautious Lady Lannister, wanted tighter control over the mines and a greater voice in the realm's taxes. The Riverlands pressed for better levies and new roads, their fields battered by the last flood. The Ironborn lobbied for trading rights, the Dornish for greater autonomy. Aemon listened to it all. He found his mother's hand beneath the table, squeezed it once, and caught her quick, knowing smile. At the edge of the council, the wildling elder Osha, now called the Old Fox, gestured for the prince to join her. "All this talk," she muttered, "is just wind in a bucket. You want peace to last? Make the children eat at the same table and you'll have fewer knives at your back. Then, he laughed, but took her meaning to heart. That night, after the council, Aemon escaped to the yard. The moon was full, washing the ancient stones in silver. He climbed the broken tower, as he'd done 100 times before, and found Sansa there, wrapped in a heavy fur cloak, her hair loose in the breeze. "You're avoiding your destiny," she teased gently. He blushed. "Just breathing, Aunt. Sometimes it's easier up here." She smiled, sad and wise. "It will never be easy, Aemon. But the world loves a boy who tries, even when he's frightened." Then he shouted. He gazed out over the torchlit fields, voice quiet. "Do you ever wish for the old days?" Sansa's eyes glimmered. "Sometimes, but more often, I'm grateful for the new. There was little joy in what we had before. You bring them hope, even when you don't see it." He leaned on the old stone. "I want them to be happy. All of them. I want to be enough." Sansa touched his cheek. "That is the best a king can want. Never lose it." Nanan. In the months that followed, Aemon came of age not in the battles or courts, but in the patience of the small tasks. He dug wells in the Riverlands when a drought struck, trading jokes with peasants and pulling ropes until his hands blistered. He learned to read a ship's chart with the Ironborn, who watched him warily at first, and then invited him below deck to see the storm lanterns and the secret caches of saffron. In Dorne, he danced in the sand with the Martell cousins, falling in love for an afternoon with a girl who kissed his cheek and called him Dragonfly. But there was shadow too. In the Vale, an old knight challenged his right to judge a dispute. "Why should I heed the son of a conqueror?" the man barked before the assembled hall. "We have had enough of fire and blood." Aemon stood, tall for his age but slight, next to the armored men. "Because I listened to both sides before I spoke. Because I know the land remembers the price of pride. And because the day I rule in anger is the day you may cast me out." The hall went quiet, and the old knight grudgingly bowed. One winter's night, as the snows came heavy and all the fires blazed in the great hall, Daenerys called Aemon to her. She was pale and tired, the years heavy upon her, though her eyes had lost none of their heat. Jon sat beside her, his hand never far from hers. "My son," Daenerys said, her voice like velvet and iron, "we have given you what peace we could win, but it will not last forever. One day, the dragons will sleep, the swords will dull, and all that will remain is the memory of how we treated one another. What will you do then?" "Nanter Sao." Aemon swallowed, staring at the flames. "I will remember, mother, and I will remind them, again and again, that it was not dragons who built this peace, but people, and that it is ours to keep or to lose." Jon reached out, squeezing his son's shoulder. "That is all we can ask." It was at midsummer, in the 13th year of his life, that the old world threatened to break through. Word reached Winterfell of unrest in Essos. An alliance of exiled Westerosi lords and sellswords, led by a man claiming Targaryen blood, had landed in the Stormlands, torching fields and raising a banner of three-headed gold upon black. Gendry was the first to respond, marshalling his smiths and archers, but Daenerys called for calm. "We will not be baited into war. Let us send words before we send dragons." Aemon, emboldened by his years of learning, begged his parents to let him go as envoy. "Let me try peace before the world demands fire," he said. Jon hesitated, but Daenerys agreed. "You will go with Grey Worm, with our faith and our love. If you fail, the realm will not blame you. But if you succeed..." The journey to the Stormlands was swift and tense. Aemon rode with a mixed company: Starks, Wildlings, Dothraki, and a pair of silent maesters from Old Town. Veraxes flew high above, out of sight but always near. They met the exiles at an old watchtower near the Weeping Town. Hard men, desperate women, banners patched and battered. The leader was a tall, dark-haired man, eyes wild with purpose. He claimed to be the last son of Rhaegar Targaryen, though the lords who followed him looked more to gold than blood. Aemon spoke first, his voice steady. "You have come for glory or for vengeance. But the people here want neither. They want food, peace, and a chance for their children to see a gentler world. Will you be the ones to steal that from them?" The pretender scoffed. "You speak as a child, boy. The world is ruled by fire." Aemon held his ground. The world was ruled by fire. Now it is ruled by bread and kindness, and those are harder to break. I offer you a seat at the council, land for those who surrender, mercy for those who truly repent. Or you can have war, and with it, nothing. There was shouting, cursing, the hiss of drawn steel. But in the end, the pretender saw the dragons circling above, and heard the quiet determination in the prince's words. He bent the knee, and the exiles laid down arms. Aemon returned to Winterfell in triumph, but there was no great feast, only quiet joy and relief. Daenerys, now frail, pressed his hands to her cheeks and whispered, "You have done what I could not. Remember this feeling, my son. Hold it when the world is darkest." In this hour, that winter, Daenerys' illness worsened. She died on the first night of the new year, the snow falling soft as feathers. The realm mourned. Lords came from every kingdom. Minstrels sang her songs, dragons keened above the walls. Jon, gray-bearded and unbowed, wept as he had never wept before. Aemon sat the vigil, sleepless, his head bowed at his mother's bier. Sansa came to him at dawn. "The world will look to you now. What will you give them?" Aemon's voice was raw. "What she gave me, hope and the will to try again." His coronation was simple, a circlet of black steel and white gold, a prayer at the heart tree, the vows of every house. Jon stood beside him as his hand, Tyrion as his wise counsel, Gendry as his sword, Sansa as his conscience. The dragons soared above, mourning and triumphant. His reign was marked not by war, but by journeys. To the Riverlands, where he rebuilt levees, to the Stormlands, where he pardoned the last of the exiles, to the Wall, where he founded a new order of watchers, men and women both, sworn to keep the peace and aid the lost. He married for love, not alliance, to a wildling girl who had saved his life in the snow. Their children ran with wolf pups and dared the dragons to chase them. Years turned, winters passed. When Jon died, it was in his sleep, his hand in his son's. The realm mourned again, but with gratitude, not fear. Aemon's greatest legacy was not a throne, but a world that remembered what it was to dream. At his death, old and surrounded by family, the bells of Winterfell rang for a day and a night. The dragons circled once, then vanished into the dawn. And in every hall, from the Frostfangs to the Summer Sea, stories were told, not of conquest, but of kindness, of patience, of the prince who was both fire and frost, who ruled not by fear, but by the unyielding hope that the world, remade by gentle hands, could always begin again. The The frost never truly left the north, but the centuries-old gloom that once clung to Winterfell had transformed. The keep, under Aemian's reign, became a beacon in the dark months, a place of learning and healing, laughter and honest toil. The shadows, of course, still lurked. Behind every harvest was the threat of drought. Behind every new law, a murmur of dissent. But these were the labors of a living kingdom, not the nightmares of blood and terror that once haunted Westeros. And Aemian, king by grace and struggle both, wore his crown with the kind of humility only childhood among smallfolk and wildlings could teach. His children, 3, in the end, all of them marked in some way by both dragon and wolf, were raised first in the kitchens and forges, later at the councils and in the shadow of the heart tree. The eldest, a girl named Marielle, quick with numbers and sharper with her tongue, was said to keep a ledger tighter than any Lannister. The middle child, Edric, loved the woods and the stables, running wild with ghost grandchildren, and coming home each day muddy but joyous. The youngest, Lyra, was the fiercest, born with the silver hair of her grandmother, a laugh that rang off stone, and an uncanny bond with the youngest of Varix's brood. Aemian had no illusions about his reign. He knew the realm could not be held together by mere banners, nor by dragonflight alone. He traveled more than any king before him, often in humble company, with only a handful of friends and a single dragon overhead, sometimes not even that. In the free cities he walked the avenues of Braavos, marveling at the merchant princes and their ships, debating with the Sea Lord on justice and trade. In Dorne he rode out into the deep sands with the Martell cousins, drinking water so sweet it seemed like wine, listening to the dreams of a people who had never fully bent the knee but now called him brother. Not overlord. He learned. He listened. He remembered his mother's voice. Let no act of cruelty, no fear, change that you are the hope of this land. But for all his peace, there were shadows from the past. It was in the 16th year of his rule, when Marielle was nearly grown, Edric a head taller than the stable boys, Lyra still a wildling at heart, that the past returned in the form of a rider, galloping hard through sleet to the gates of Winterfell. His banner bore a device none had seen in a generation. A crowned lion rampant, twisted around a crimson tree. Sansa, still regal in her age and wisdom, greeted the rider herself. He bore a message, not a demand, but its words trembled with old threat. Across the sea, in the disputed lands near the Rhoyne, a lord calling himself the Lion King of the West was raising a mercenary host. His aim was not simply the gold of the Lannisters lost at sea, but the throne itself, a claim to restore the true blood of Casterly Rock to power, with steel and fire if need be. Tyrion, long since retired from his offices, but ever the sharp mind, listened as the message was read. "Fool's gold," he snorted. "But fools with swords make dangerous company." Aemian's council gathered in the Solar, lords and ladies from every reach, old wildling chiefs, free folk, new blood, and old. The debate was fierce. The old guard called for a show of force. Send the dragons, raise their fleet, make an end of it before it could ever begin. Marielle argued for patience. It is not war, but rumor and greed. Let the free cities handle their own, or at most, send envoys to buy peace. But Edric, usually silent, surprised them. "The people here fear stories more than swords," he said. "If you send dragons, they'll think the tales are true. The king is a tyrant in waiting. If you send nothing, they'll see weakness." Aemian listened to each, letting the arguments play out. When they finished, he rose, his voice quiet but firm. "We will send Lyra and Edric as our envoys, with Lady Sansa as their guide and wisdom. Let them see the face of our realm, our kin, our values, not our fire. I will follow on Dragonback, but not as conqueror. If war comes, it comes to us all. And I will not order my children to do what I would not." Then, Lyra, wild and silver-haired, was overjoyed. Edric, cautious but loyal, went with quiet determination. Sansa, unbending as the north itself, led their party across the sea to the merchant courts of Norvos, to the harbors of Pentos, and the blood-red bridges of Volantis, speaking not just with the lords, but with the merchants, the coin counters, the priests, and the laborers who truly moved the wheels of power. The Lion King, when they finally met him in the gold-draped audience chamber of a palazzo in Tyrosh, was no more than a tired, clever-eyed man in his 40s, his beard touched with gray, his sword hand nervous. "You come to bargain or to threaten?" he asked Sansa. "To remind you," she said, "that the wars you remember ended in ruin for all. The realm you covet is not the realm you lost. Here, a king's children ride beside wildlings, and the crown is as much a burden as a prize. If you come for gold, we will buy you off. If you come for blood, you will find only the sea." N.T. Edric met the man's gaze. "You could find a place here if you wished, but not as king, not as foe." Lyra, eyes dancing, offered him a single dragon's scale, iridescent, impossibly strong. "You could sell this in the market for enough coin to buy a dozen crowns. Or you could keep it as a token, and come to Winterfell as friend, not conqueror." The Lion King, defeated not by swords, but by the relentless logic of peace, agreed to a treaty. He left for the east, a handful of followers behind, his ambition spent not in fire but in the soft strength of honest talk. When they returned, Aemon greeted them on the highest tower. "You have done more for peace than I ever could with flame," he told them, embracing his children, Sansa's hand warm in his. But he saw in Edric's eyes a lingering worry. "We can't always talk them down, father. Sooner or later, someone will force our hand." Aemon looked out over the endless snows, the wild woods, the bustling town beyond the walls. "Then we will show them what it is to be dragons, to protect, not to devour. To fight when there is no other choice, but never for pride." He turned to his council, then to the gathered people in the hall. "I do not promise you an end to trouble, but I promise you this. As long as I draw breath, your king will walk among you. I will hear your fears. I will work your fields and learn your crafts. I will ride beside you, not above you, whether in peace or in war." Nimon. That year, the harvest was bountiful, and the first great thaw in decades swept through the riverlands, opening new land for planting. In the Stormlands, Miriel brokered a peace between squabbling bannermen, her letters as deft as any sword. In Dorne, Lyra rode with the sand steeds and traded half her jewels for a barrel of sweet oranges. Edric returned to the Wall, now not a fortress but a meeting place for the free folk. And there he trained a new order of watchers, men and women both, sworn not to a king but to the safety of the land. But it was in Winterfell, around the great fires, that Aemon was happiest. He sat with his wife and children, listened to their stories, shared the sorrows and hopes of his people. Ghosts' descendants curled at his feet. Virax's brood flew overhead, their shadows dark and proud against the winter sky. As years passed, the tales grew with them. There were small wars and petty feuds, a failed rebellion in the arbor, a winter so bitter that even dragons huddled close to the fires. There were marriages, deaths, new laws and old customs revived, festivals and funerals, and the slow, patient turning of the wheel. But never again did war threaten the heart of Westeros. And never again did fear outweigh hope in the lives of those who called the land their own. In his last years, Aemon grew thin and gray, his hair streaked with silver, his hands marked by work. He was beloved not as a conqueror, but as a man who had built and mended, who had lost and loved, who had ruled not by right, but by trust. When he felt his end drawing near, he called his children and grandchildren to the godswood. "The world is not made new by kings or dragons," he said, his voice as soft as falling snow, "but by each of you, every day. Remember your mother's lesson. No act of cruelty, no fear must change what you are. Hold the world in open hands, not clenched fists. Let each year's winter teach you patience, and each spring teach you to hope again." He died that night quietly, in his sleep, with his hand held by Lyra, and Miriel reading softly from the old books. Edric and his children by the fire. The bells of Winterfell rang for a week. Across Westeros, and even in the far free cities, people stopped and remembered. A king who had walked among them, who had built a realm, not with fire and blood, but with listening, with learning, with the stubborn, ever-renewing strength of peace. Dragons soared overhead, mourning and proud, their wings trailing fire in the night sky. And in every home, from the richest hall to the humblest hearth, the stories were told of the child of Jon and Daenerys, destined to rule, but choosing instead to serve. And long after, when the children of his children played in the shadow of Winterfell's towers, when the world had changed 100 times, when the old songs faded and new ones were sung, that memory endured. The memory of hope, of patience, of a king whose reign proved that true rule is not claimed by birth or fire, but by the courage to love and will, no matter how long the night.